Growing popcorn is easy. All you need is to get some popcorn and sow it. I have here a non-GMO Amish country popcorn that should work. But I also have here an old packet, and I'm trying to get rid of all my old seed packets. This one is from more than 4 years ago, and I doubt that it's very fresh and viable. So what I'm going to do is pre-sprout this one to see if it actually sprouts. And it's going to be similar to the plate method, except for this time I'm not using plastic. I'm reusing this white container here that has a lid. I'm putting a paper towel here and throwing some water and then sprinkling the seeds. As soon as the little root starts poking out of the seed, you have to plant them. You can't wait too long because they're very much clustered inside of this here. And you don't want the root to get damaged. The root tips is where mitosis happens and where the root grows. So do not damage the tip. Now this one, since it's newer, although it wasn't sold for seed, it was sold to be consumed, I would think it's newer and that it would be viable to plant directly. Most likely both will be viable, but we'll see what happens. While I do like to pre-sprout most seeds, corn is one that really doesn't need this process to grow well. They usually germinate reliably if you water them. Soaking the seed overnight could also be another way of increasing the chances of fast germination without having to go through all this trouble. But there is an advantage to doing this extraordinary step. While I have not proven it scientifically, I believe that when you sow pre-sprouted corn seed outside, you lessen the chances of birds and other critters eating up the seeds, since they seem to prefer the ungerminated seed. In any case, I went out and scattered the prepared garden bed with dry, unsprouted popcorn seed. I would be able to see how they would fare compared to my pre-sprouted seed. I was trying to space them out about 6 inches or so from each other, planting them in clumps of several seeds. When you're sowing seed broadcast style, just sow double. Half of them will be for you, the other half for the critters that love eating corn kernels. This bed was covered with a 3 to 4 inch layer of grass clippings and other chopped organic matter to serve as mulch. About 2 days later, the seeds inside the white container were bursting with life. While the seed packet had been stored for some years now, the seeds were anything but dead. In fact, their long roots were not a good sign. They had grown too fast and too big and needed to be buried as soon as possible. The main reason why I pre-sprouted the corn was to see if there's actually a difference in pre-sprouting them prior to planting. I feel that by pre-sprouting they may grow a little bit faster and may also be less susceptible to be eaten by birds or other animals as a seed before they sprout. So we'll see if that turns out to be true, because I planted the other corn in the same day that I started the germination, so should be the same time frame. Usually mulch prevents weed seeds from emerging, but I think corn doesn't have much trouble waking up under this soft grass clipping blanket and spearing its way until it reaches light. One thing was true, the conditions inside the white container had been perfect for germination. That is why almost all the seeds sprouted in haste, despite their age and possible staleness. Given the weather conditions in the 60s with constant humidity, I would think that seeds grown directly on the ground would also be bursting open, ready to start their new life. Most likely this time there wouldn't be much of a difference, but if we had been experiencing a period of drought or unusual cold, the pre-germinated seeds would have shown a faster rate of germination and growth, since they would be sheltered inside for the first critical days that dictate seed germination. There is one thing about sowing dry seed that makes the process much easier. Handling them is less finicky than having to gingerly pick up fragile germinating seeds from a tangled mass of newer roots. Coming up in the next block, I will share what became of the popcorn plants right after this commercial. About 4 weeks later, I had popcorn growing all over the bed, both from the seed that had been pre-germinated as well as from the dry ones. Both appeared to be doing well. The corn is not disappointing in its growth. I see large leaves forming well, so there must be enough nitrogen here. Putting up several layers of grass clippings has helped, and I can only imagine that in a few weeks I'll be having the ears forming, and I'll have to wait for them to fully mature and dry because this is popcorn, not sweet corn, so it needs to be fully mature in the plant for it to actually be used as popcorn. But I'm excited to see how it's turning out, and the beans are actually working well with it. I see some corn over there even growing, so good harvest, we'll see. Sure enough, just a few weeks later, the popcorn was flowering, starting the process for year production. The popcorn is looking amazing. It's already setting flower, and you have ears forming here. So pollination has started. If you tap, you can see the pollen dropping, and it's a good idea to always grow corn in clumps, in groups. That way you aid the pollination, because the pollen has to go from this flower to the silks. That's where it will get pollinated and it will set seed. If it doesn't get pollinated, it will not set seed, so you won't have a uniform ear of corn. So it's a good rule of thumb, always plant them in groups. It's a little bit harder when planting in a smaller space to find enough space to have enough corn. So you don't want to plant just one plant of corn. You need a little group. Even here it's a little bit of a small group, and I could have inconsistent setting of kernels. But otherwise, I still think they're a really sculptural plant. I know they may look very ordinary and normal just because we see it all the time, but it's kind of a beautiful grass, and it complements well, I think, with these pillars of beans. It may be odd to see corn as an ornamental plant, but it has its beauty. We only see it as ordinary because it is so prolific with widespread cultivation. Many times, growing corn at a small home garden is not worth the trouble. There is merit to this idea since they take a lot of space to produce a low-value crop. Corn also hogs nitrogen from the soil. I decided to grow popcorn instead of sweet corn because I feel like it gives me something I can use and that I feel has more value. Soon enough, as the years of corn developed, the other vining plants started to cover them up, fighting for every last drop of sunlight. It's time to harvest some of the corn, and I'm actually surprised that it produced some ears. Corn is a very nitrogen hogging plant, yet even with all these other plants growing and creating competition for it, it still produced some nice ears, some nice full ears of popcorn. So I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm sure that the fact that beans are growing next to it, they don't tend to hog as much nitrogen. But I have here cucumbers, which also are known to use a lot of nitrogen, and yet the corn is here. So it just goes to show the power of grass clippings. They're very high in nitrogen, and there's absolutely no need to add nitrogen fertilizer if you just throw your grass clippings in your bed. So start reusing those. Now it's time to harvest these. My humble experiment with growing popcorn had turned out to be successful, even though they had not grown in ideal conditions. In order to use my bounty, I would still have to let them dry fully in the sun for a few days. In order for popcorn to pop, it must be fully dry. If it is not fully dry, it will not pop properly. You must also allow the ears to dry with the plant before picking them. Unlike sweet corn that is picked when still immature, popcorn has to fully ripen attached to the plant. I encourage anyone to experiment growing popcorn, even if it is to gain better appreciation for the life cycle of this delicious treat.